So you are not in the line of fire down there with the fires?
Yeah. I mean, your show says Jesse on fire, but we're literally on fire right now.
Yeah. See, that's why I press record right there.
So no, my son's school burned down, and
really,
and we had to evacuate my parents, and our studios shut down because it lost power.
Jeez.
So I'm in my home studio instead of the studio that we have in LA.
Man, a kid brought a gun to my kid's school today, got caught and rung up. So apparently there's something in the air nationwide in terms of threats to schools. But the whole school burned down. What's actually, you don't need to tell me what city your kid's school is in, but yeah, man, I don't know, because we're from California. You know, I woke up and had, I don't know, a million messages from people that were like, you know, like group text off friends of ours that are down there. And I saw the Pacific Palisades stuff, like just it looks like the entire area is flat. Yeah.
So I haven't gone to see it, obviously, because the fires are still happening. But like the mall we went to is burnt down. The school's burnt down. We had to pull my daughter out of another school because it was in the evacuation zone. My parents were in the evacuation zone. So it's a mess.
I've always, by the way, thought that the fires in California in many cases are being started by arson, because I lived in California my whole life. And I was like, some of these don't add up. There was a time in 2019 where there was a wildfire in literally every area from Redding down to like Los Angeles. I'm like, this is impossible. That doesn't make sense unless someone's doing this, you know?
Yeah. So couple of things. No, I don't think that it's anything that's orchestrated, but there are some factors that play into it. So first of all, when you're pointing about 2020 and now, in a period of transition, sometimes people act out, right? They act out of anger, fear, especially about fear about change, right? So that's why sometimes it happens around these elections, before and after the elections. So in terms of California, that has a very specific reason why. And it has to do with corruption and money in politics. So some part of it is, in LA, of course, the homelessness situation is out of hand, and a lot of them are doing meth, and so they light some fires for whatever different drugs that they do, and then those fires sometimes rage out of control. That's a smaller problem, though. That's a problem, right? And sometimes when you go to fix it, some folks on our side say you're being discriminatory against our unhoused neighbors. I'm like, no, brother, no. Our unhoused neighbors, we shouldn't beat them up. We shouldn't do weird things to them. And, they got issues and we need to help them. But we don't need to let them start fires. That's not a thing we need to do, right? And so that's a point. But the bigger problem is the corruption, because PG&E is the main utility company in California, and their power wires should be buried, but they're up on poles, right? But burying them in the state would cost PG&E a lot of money and a lot of profits, right? But they found an easy way to fix that. They just gave Gavin Newsom $10 million in campaign contributions throughout his career. So Gavin Newsom then said, no, you don't have to bury the wires. You can continue to make all this profit. And we know every time there's a big wind, it's going to knock down the power wires, which is going to start a fire. And then once that fire starts, it spreads. And then there's more wind, and then knocks down other wires. And that's why you see it up and down the California coast, because Gavin Newsom took $10 million from PG&E. Our houses burned down over and over again.
Yeah, just do whatever you want, you guys. So I went to college in Chico, so that when the Paradise Fire happened, like not a very small number of people's parents were displaced permanently. They never built that town back. Like it's like a place I visit. I used to play golf. There's a golf course there that I used to play. That place is gone. Like that is not a place that people live anymore. All of the infrastructure that was around, in that town. Now, yeah, it's like a small town, but it's like erased off the map. And, the entire the entire system where things like that, because a lot of people know about exactly how that works, and it just kind of, I don't know. I mean, aside from, people who speak about it publicly, make it an issue, there's never any repercussions for any of it where you're like, dude, all these people are dead, man. Everybody lost their homes, and this happens again, and just everyone's like, oh, well, it is what it is. The interesting thing about PG&E is, like I said, I lived in California Bay Area for basically, Chico, the Bay Area, or San Diego, my entire life. When I moved to Texas and they have the open, it's the exact opposite, right? You have, in California, you have a single option, which means they don't have to compete. They can burn the entire state down. Nothing ever happens. The stock stays the same. People pay the same, whatever. And I moved to Texas. It's the exact opposite. We moved into our house and someone gave us a paper. It was like, here are the options for your power company. And there were like 20 power companies. And I'm like, what the fuck? I'd never seen anything like that. I was like, these are all like, you're talking about like electricity. They're like, yeah, you have to choose. They're all, don't choose the cheap ones. And I'm like, they're like, those are like really shitty grids. So we got a suggestion of which one to go with, but ours has been awesome, but we went with a more expensive one, and I think we're on the same grid as like a hospital. But it's like it's super bizarre. And if you talk to anyone in Texas about how it works, people are like they've got a lot of issues with how it works here. I don't know how you figure out like a middle ground between PG&E and like the Wild West in Texas, but there certainly has to be a better option than California. And in Texas is really weird too, where like randomly the power goes out or whatnot. But yeah, man, I don't know.
Yeah, real quick. Yeah, it's actually the same problem. Like, it's not the system that's the issue. Like, the competition among the utilities, it sounds interesting to me. Like, I hate that we always have to have one monopoly that we must buy from, right? Mm-hmm. But in Texas, you had huge problems with the freezing and all of that. And a lot of those companies donate to Greg Abbott. And so Greg Abbott never held him accountable for the massive failure in the grid during that stretch where it froze, right? And real citizens of Texas died, et cetera. But what did they do? Those same companies then greased Greg Abbott again, and then he went back to not holding them accountable. So like that's why people get confused. They're like, wait, you guys are on the left, but you hate Gavin Newsom in California. Why? Because it isn't, because Gavin Newsom isn't on the left. Gavin Newsom is just a corporate politician. And I would argue that Greg Abbott is also a corporate politician. They pretend to be on the right and the left, but really what they're doing is servicing their donors.
How do you feel like, obviously I saw your tweet about how you said that you felt more optimistic than you expected to after the election, which surprised me zero, honestly. That doesn't surprise me even a little bit in terms of anybody who hates the establishment. Like, and you start seeing the appointments and you're like, so what does that mean? And I mean, I completely understand, but how do you feel now as, what the administration is probably going to look like is starting to shake out? I literally was just watching Glenn Greenwald talk about the Treasury Department, the head of the Treasury Department. They're saying that he's a Soros guy. And I'm like, really? And they're trying to, this is going to be like a multi-layered question. They are trying to say that, now everyone realizes the fix was in with Trump and that actually, they were always going to do this Soros thing. They pretend like he hates Soros or whatever. And I'm like, okay, what I don't know how to make anything of that, given that they tried to put Trump in jail. They tried to, like, all these things that they did to Trump in the media. Like, no one's going to convince me that all of that was some grandiose conspiracy to get Soros in as the Treasury Secretary. Like, clearly there was a very concerted effort to keep Trump out and to put him in a negative light. But anybody that's anywhere near Soros now, I'm like, that gives me pause. And I literally was just watching it now, so I haven't done like a deep dive on the guy's connection to Soros. But I don't know. What do you think about that stuff?
Yeah. So look, you and I had a good, interesting debate about Trump before the election, right? And my concerns about Trump. So why did I feel optimistic afterwards? Because my real enemy is the establishment. Establishment media that lies to us and creates this mirage of how things are when it's not true at all. establishment Democrats and Republicans, Pelosi, McConnell, Biden, Cheney, all these folks, right? And so, and for the moment being, they'll be back, but for the moment being, they were defeated. And so now, but at the same time, I'm worried about Trump. So then that leads to the question of like, then now what happens next, right? Well, the first thing that, that happened, in my opinion, after the election and why I wrote that tweet is I kind of looked around at the carnage and I was like, oh shit, mainstream media is really hurt, right? And I love it. And so when people start, like in the old days, they just bully everyone. And what the right doesn't know is they would bully us the most, right? If you're a progressive Bernie Sanders kind of economic populist on the left, mainstream media despises us. They hate us more than they hate the right wing. And so you saw when Bernie won Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada, the first 3 states in 2020, they started talking about how his supporters are Nazis. Oh, where have I heard that before, right? And brown shirts, and how, oh my God, he's going to execute people in Central Park, and all this.
They said that about Bernie Sanders?
Yeah, literally. Chris Matthews said if Bernie Sanders wins, people like him would execute people like me in Central Park. Like, what the?
I don't understand how do they say shit like that? I don't even understand. I don't even understand how words like that could come out of a person's face without, don't you have shame? Like, aren't you embarrassed that you would say a thing that's so overtly not true into a mainstream media camera? It's embarrassing.
Yeah, I mean, like, at least Trump says some wild and outrageous stuff that then they can build off and go, well, he did say this, right?
They can take it out of context and pretend.
Yeah, I mean, and we can disagree on some of those and stuff, right? But with Bernie, everybody knows he wouldn't hurt a fly, right? You could agree or disagree with his policies, but that brother's not executing anyone in Central Park, right?
Yeah, no.
So, like, they're so over the top. But whenever you went to criticize that, they'd be like, you radical outsider, you should be canceled, right?
They say you're going to start executing people in Central Park.
Of course.
It's the same playbook every time.
Every time. And always there's some sort of sex charge. Always, right? So like
they are very consistent with that move. That's their go-to.
Yeah, Madison Cawthorn on the right? Disagree with a lot of what he said on policy, but he takes on the establishment Republicans. All of a sudden pictures come out and sex stories come out. Oh, so you had the pictures all along and you had the sex stories all along. You just didn't use them until he started pissing off establishment Republicans, right? Same thing happens to us on the left, right? I run for Congress. All of a sudden, they found these blogs from 20 years ago. And they're like, oh, Jake, you said this about women or whatever. I'm like, here, I'll give you one example to give you a sense of how much they smear anyone who isn't an insider. So, and in that one legendary New York Times article had like 6 outrageous lies about me. Unbelievable, right? But the famous line that came out of that blog was, I do this blog about how I can't get laid in Miami Beach and how lame I am, right? And I go, well, obviously the genetics of women are flawed that they don't want to have sex with us, right? And I'm kidding, and I'm making a joke about myself, right? And they take that quote out of context on purpose, and they're like, Cenk Uygur says women's genes are flawed. He's a right-wing, this, that. I'm like, right-wing? What are you guys talking about, right?
Right wing means not aligned with whatever we're pushing right this second.
100%. And one outrageous lie after another. He's anti-Muslim. Hey, dickheads, I am Muslim. Right? Like, I'm an atheist now, but my family's Muslim, my background's Muslim. You don't think that's relevant when you're smearing me as anti-Muslim? Let alone
you're anti your parents, dude.
Yeah. So anyway, these guys are giant liars. So when I saw them defeated and humbled, I loved it. So I was
pretty fun watching Scarborough have to go down to Mar-a-Lago. You know what I mean? After years of fucking with Trump, and then he has to go down there and apologize. And I just, I mean, honestly, like that's got to be a big part of it. Is Trump is just a sledgehammer to these fucks. That's why everybody loves it.
Yeah. So like some on the left see Scarborough doing that and me going on right-wing shows, and they go, that's the same thing. And I'm like, no, guys, you're not getting it. So I am anti-establishment, and I am going to talk to other people who are anti-establishment.
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying to see if we got some agreement in this new world where the left-right paradigm isn't as controlling as it used to be. And the mainstream media lock on our minds isn't what it used to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Scarborough is going down there because Scarborough loves to kiss up to power. That's his only move. He doesn't have a second move, right? So he's like, all right, well, I used to kiss Trump's ass back in the day. Then I started kissing Biden's ass. Now I guess I got to go back to kissing Trump's ass, right? Because that's his
He
only
won.
He won. So that's why mainstream media's head is melting right now as we speak, because they're like, must follow power, don't like Trump, don't know what to do, they're malfunctioning as we speak. So that's why I get excited. Now, to your question about how do I feel about what Trump has done so far, well, look, I'm not at all surprised at what he's done, and that's part of what I was telling you before the election, which is that Trump's going to go towards the money, right? So, but he has one giant upside, and that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where it's going to get really interesting, right? So to me, the downside is, well, what did he do? On foreign policy, he put in Marco Rubio at State, Stefanik at UN, Huckabee at Ambassador to Israel, Mike Waltz at National Security Advisor, and I would argue Pete Hegseth at Defense. Hegseth is a little bit more of a borderline case, but the other four are for sure neocons, right? And so that's Team Israel, Team Miriam Adelson. She's his third largest donor. The Adelson family, through the 3 elections, are his largest donor overall, even more than Elon Musk. So he gives them foreign policy. And then he says they're going to have hell to pay in Gaza. Brother, they're already in hell. What more hell can you give them, right? And so then on Elon, he's his largest donor in this cycle, and he gives him domestic policy. And he says, okay, DOGE is in charge of cutting spending. Well, that's all of domestic policy, right? So he gives him that. So am I happy with that direction? No. Okay.
What do you think about the DOGE, the DOGE thing in general, though? Because like that's one where I am in principle very aligned. Where like when I look at some of these, that's actually one of the ways where, because I never was like a heavy fiscal policy guy at all. Like I would look and go, all right, this is like the main cultural, pillars that these groups are standing on, and it helped me kind of delegate which direction I felt like I was going to go, because I was never really on either side. But one thing that changed my perspective immensely is I worked for a guy I think I started working for him like in 2017. And he was like, dude, you want to go from whatever you think you are to a fiscal conservative? He's like, go pull the San Francisco budget. He's like, the state budget, federal budget's too big for you to actually have any kind of perspective on what's actually going on. Pull the budget for San Francisco and look at how much they spend on each individual item, because these are numbers that you can reconcile in your mind about whether or not this makes sense. And you look, and it was like these line items are so ludicrous that you can't even make it up. Like he would tell me things like, he's like, dude, they spend I can't remember the exact number, but on improving homelessness. That's a big one, and then like there was something about human feces cleanup, and you're like, these numbers don't make sense. And then he also pointed out how they never ever align budget to outcome. Okay, they propose this, and then here's the outcome. I saw something actually on Instagram today about like the California, mega rail or whatever, and how they said, is it true they spent $100 billion on that, or they budgeted $100 billion for it?
I'm not positive about that one, but
yeah,
man, let me tear into what you're saying, right?
Please.
In largely in agreement, right?
Mm-hmm.
So look, DOGE can go one of two ways, right? It's devil's in the details. So let's start with California and then work our way up to DOGE. To your point, in California, we have authorized $24 billion in spending on the homeless. And what has happened with homelessness over the last, I can't remember if it's 4 years or 10 years, but even say that it's 10 years. It's gone up. Yeah, it's gone up 53%, right? So where'd the money go? And so, like, if you say to me, give 24, and I voted yes on those things. So I literally said, yes, if you want me to spend this money to help make sure that we address the homelessness problem, yes, take my money, right? But then you look at it and you go, okay, where did you spend it? And what did you do?
Mm-hmm.
And not only did homelessness go up dramatically and not down like they said, but on top of that, when you ask them, they go, we don't have to tell you. No, you do have to tell us. You're our government. That's our money. No, you don't get to say, I'm not telling you. And then our press in California is so compliant. The Los Angeles Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, and everyone else, right?
Los Angeles Times might be one of the worst papers in the country for that, I think. Specifically, the Los Angeles Times. Easily.
There isn't anything that Gavin Newsom or Karen Bass could do where they wouldn't kiss her ass. And so they're always right about everything. They never, but more importantly, they never question that. When the governor says, I don't know where the money is on $24 billion, your job in media is to rip his face off, right? Rhetorically, politically, journalistically, obviously not physically, but you're supposed to say, what the fuck, on behalf of the readers and the voters, where's the fucking money, right?
And maybe make sure that $7 billion of that is not in your fucking family through things you've. It's like at the very least, maybe look into whether or not he intentionally siphoned all of this money off into his own pocket. They don't even look at that.
Yeah, and so my co-host on the Young Turks, Anna Kasparian, she's been looking into the nonprofits because and I know when I ran for Congress, I heard through the rumor mill that this is kind of how it works. They're connected politicians then go set up nonprofits, and then they take huge salaries and they funnel the money to the nonprofits. And so that's part of where the money goes. We've seen now that part of where the money goes is they go and buy land that they claim they're going to turn into homeless projects and buildings, and they pay twice what the market value is, sometimes 3 times the market value. Now, this part the journalists haven't connected because they're not journalists. But my guess is if you go to find out who owns those real estate properties, it's going to be donors to Democrats in the California Democratic Party. Okay.
Yeah.
So they're just systematically robbing us. And so you should be super mad about what they're doing with taxpayer money. But if you care about the homeless, you should also be mad that they didn't help the homeless at all. Right. They didn't help them. They didn't get them off the streets. They didn't get them mental health facilities. They didn't get them housing. They didn't do shit. Right. So now, but that doesn't mean that government can't work. Right. That's the problem. Is the government. The problem is the corruption. In Houston, they had somebody come in and reorganize the entire bureaucracy of how they dealt with the homeless issue. And she connected all those organizations and said, okay, now you do step 1. These guys do step 2. These guys do step 3. They reduce homelessness by 40%. In Salt Lake City, Utah, they built homes. And they solved for this stretch of time. It's not the same anymore. But in that stretch of time, they got rid of homelessness completely. They literally put them in houses, and it didn't cost that much, right? So there are real answers we can get to once you get past the corruption, right?
Of course.
But getting past the corruption is the number one problem. And so now when you connect it back at the federal level to DOGE, so if DOGE turns into a bullshit excuse to make sure that Elon's businesses are not regulated, and that he could, do whatever he wants and not have any worker protection at Tesla, SpaceX, blah, 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 or he could do insider trading or whatever, and they don't actually get rid of any of the waste and the giant corruption, et cetera, then it's going to be a disaster, right? But if it goes in the right direction and they go, no, we meant it. We said that we were going to cut from the military-industrial complex, and here's what we cut from the military-industrial complex. We said we were going to, I'll give you such an easy example that nobody ever talks about. The oil companies get about $30 billion in subsidies every year. So if you're on the right and you think, hey, I like drill, baby, drill, and I want us to be the leading country in energy production, and I don't really believe in climate change, et cetera, I'll debate you on climate change, but that's for another day. Fine. For the purpose of this conversation, fine. But why should they get another $30 billion from us? They're the richest companies in the world. I mean, they don't even pay for their own costs, which is climate change. And then we got to deal with the natural disasters. Okay, again, but put that aside. Why are we giving them money on top when they're literally among the most profitable corporations in the history of humanity? So if you're not talking about cutting that, then you're full of shit, right? Then you don't really care about fraud, waste, abuse, corruption. You're just playing games. So that proof, Jesse, is going to be in the pudding. And
yeah. And I'm aligned on that.
Yeah, sorry. Last thing, Jesse, on that. What I'm really, really hoping for is if they go in the wrong direction, that right-wing hosts and right-wing media and right-wing base goes, nah, brother, that's not what we meant at all, right?
They will. They will. If that's what happens, you could just base it on the H-1B visa issue and how quick everybody was to like just rip their faces off online as soon as there was like an issue they didn't agree with. That said, I think on the just honestly more as an overarching theme as it relates to like the way that government spends money and the kind of connective tissue between government officials who get elected, big business, and the tax base and how we spend it. Everywhere that I look, and I mean basically every single category, what it appears to me to be is a systematic formula to rob the tax base. And that's the real reason that we're in such an enormous amount of debt. Now, is that something that's solvable at this point when you already have $34 trillion or $35 trillion in debt? I mean, there is a certain point where you're just going to have to keep pyramiding debt because that's just what it is. But to me, like you look at these programs, you look at the pharmaceutical industry, and I mean, if you just wanted to take the vaccine thing, which is obviously, hopefully that's a thing of the past. Actually, I don't even know if they're still giving away the COVID vaccine or not. But when they're like, it's free, you're like, no, it's not. They're like, no, it is. You just go get it. And you're like, and why is it free? Oh, well, the government paid for it. You're like, nope, you paid for it, guy. You know what I mean? That came from the tax base. Then you look at to your point, military industrial complex, and they're like, yeah, we're every time that they just kind of, sign more billions and billions of dollars to foreign wars, you think they're sending that money to those countries? They're just sending old weapons and buying new ones. It's another, way to just extract tax dollars from the for Raytheon and Lockheed and all these companies. And it's like basically every single big business that you look at, it's like at some point they figured out that selling products to consumers is way more cumbersome than just having some corrupt politicians sign a piece of paper and they just extract their profits from the tax base. And so all of it basically comes down to that. If you're talking big business, that's what you do. You put people in office, you have them change the law, you have them sign this, sign that, and you can make these enormous, unfathomable profits without having to actually go market anything, create the best product, or any of the things that work in actual like true capitalist business where you're selling real things to real people. And so I don't know. I mean, I don't even know how they would even start to address that either. That to me, it all comes out like you need to start sending people to fucking jail. Like people need to start going to jail. You know what I mean? Like set an example of these people. And from there, maybe they'll think twice about pretending that this happened and putting this fake story out and all of these things that kind of all fit together. They need to start sending people to fucking jail.